But before we begin, I have to tell you, I'm wondering how many of you I have already met. Albania has become a place that I call second home. I love Albania. I love the people, the food, and of course, especially the teachers. From all that I've experienced, I know how energetic and passionate you are about what you do. And I've also found that you are some of the most fun people I've ever met. My first trip to Albania was in 2013, and I'm going to show you a picture of my friend Alma Elliott and I from that year. Since then, I've made a total of 6 trips to Albania, and in March of 2020, there were plans for me to be there, but we all know what happened to prevent that. And I believe I promised not to talk about that in this presentation. So recently, it's been very easy to find ourselves stuck. We focus on all of the problems that we're facing, and I can't deny that there are plenty of problems. But sometimes as we focus more and more of our energy on our problems, they just get bigger and feel more overwhelming. So this evening, let's borrow some advice that I heard from some marriage counselors. They tell us that if we focus on the problems all the time, we can actually make them feel bigger than they are. So I say, at least for today, let's take our eyes off our problems and talk about some fun learning ideas instead. Here are my personal wishes for you and your classroom. I wish you more peace and calm. Even as I say those words, it almost helps my shoulders go down, but I pray that your shoulders could come down also. I wish you less hurry. Wouldn't that be a great thing? I wish you more student engagement, and certainly I wish you more enjoyment for everyone, for your students, and especially for you, the teachers. The heart of teaching is creating teaching communities of hungry learners. You prepare a buffet full of strategies and resources and activities to engage your students in a variety of thinking processes. You help them enjoy being creative and thinking deeply. So first, let's talk about some brain research that you may already be aware of. And I'm talking about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. I believe this little piece of understanding can change everything for our students. And research agrees with me. The fixed mindset says that you are only given so much talent and so much intelligence. The growth mindset, on the other hand, teaches students something very different. It teaches them that every time they are pushed outside of their comfort zone, every time they have to work really, really hard, their brain makes a new connection. The more they do this, the more they take risks, and the more they persevere through difficult tasks, the more they will learn and be ready for the next challenge. Research shows that students who are taught to understand their own active role in the learning experience process experience substantial improvements in their performance. Share this brain research with your students. Teach them that hard work is like weightlifting for them. Teach them that it will make them strong. And when they are working hard, highlight for them, hey, you are making new connections You're getting smarter and your brain is getting stronger. Before we go any further, I want you to think about what mindset you want to have and which mindset do you want your students to have? What kinds of things might you do or say in the classroom to let everyone who enters your room know that you believe that everyone can grow as a learner? So I'm going to give you a minute just to write down any thoughts about how you might integrate a discussion of the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset into your learning discussions. So take a minute and make some notes for yourself. Go ahead. I would love to know if this is something that you're familiar with or not, but I'm going to give you little moments like this to write your thoughts down so that when you're all done with our time together, you have something to go back to and reflect on. So as we talk about some of the fun practices that nurture creativity and foster deep thinking, I believe that we can learn something else from the growth mindset that relates to creativity. The fixed mindset tells us that only some people are creative while others are not. And maybe that has been your own experience in the way that we have been taught. We might think that creativity is just for some people, especially if we define creativity very narrowly. For example, some people think that creativity is for only people who are artistic. And while it is true that artistic people are creative, creativity is much, much broader than that, and it involves every aspect of our lives. The fixed mindset also incorrectly communicates that there is nothing you can do to become more creative, or for that matter, to think more deeply. Those with the fixed mindset believe our students can't possibly be the next John Gazuli or the next Spiru Gega or the next Ismail Kadare, or for that matter, a successful chef or the creator of a new app. Isn't that why we got into teaching in the first place? Right? Because we believe that all students can make progress when they work hard. In the same way, all students can learn to be more creative and they can learn to think more critically. In our classrooms, let's highlight how creative people think in science, engineering, and mathematics, as well as in art and music and literature. Giving students choice is another small change that allows students to own the learning process. It communicates that you, the teacher, care about what they care about. You want them to enjoy learning. For offering student choice, I recommend you start small. It doesn't have to be super complicated. Here are some ways to offer students a choice in their learning, to give them some autonomy and the ability to direct their own learning. Now, because you're teachers, I know that you will be creative enough to choose, adapt, and make one or two of these ideas completely your own. So here they are. Instead of offering one writing prompt, give 2 or 3 and allow the students to choose which one they want to complete. If you have 3 learning tasks, you could let the students decide in which order they want to complete them. You could just remind them to pay attention to the time given to complete all 3. And at the end of that time, you might want to pair students up and ask them to share with each other why they chose the order they did. It may help students gain insight into strategies other learners use. Another idea is if students are researching a historical figure from a particular time period you are studying, let them choose from several options. You could let students vote on the next read aloud book that you use in your class. You could read a synopsis of each book, and then for each book choice, invite one student to persuade his or her classmates in a minute or less why that is the book they should vote for, and then you could have a write-in vote. If you're using an essay question, you could give 2 options for students, and each question could have its own rubric so students understand your expectations, what they need to be able to demonstrate in their answer. Or in science, let students choose which problem they would like to write a hypothesis for. So these are just some places that you can give your students choice, and I know you will make them your own. I want to give you a minute or 2, again, to take some notes about ideas that might have popped into your head already about what you would like to do. So I'm going to give you that minute right now. Okay. Once you experience the excitement that comes from giving students choice, I predict you'll be looking for other ways to promote student choice in your classroom. I wish I were there right now and we were all in the same room and I could hear your ideas and you could share ideas with each other. Maybe it's possible that after this evening you could get together with a teacher friend or with a group of colleagues and share some ideas that you intend to try. So next, we will focus on harnessing the power of asking good questions. As you think about your curriculum for next week, can you think of a place where it would be helpful to have students generate some in-depth questions about the topic you will be discussing? What are they curious about? We can start with the traditional questions of a newspaper reporter. You know them: who, what, why, when, where, and how. Use these to generate a class list of questions about the topic you're going to engage in learning. Have the students write their questions under each heading: who, what, why, when, where, and how, on pieces of paper or on the board. Then have individual students explain which question that maybe another student proposed is their favorite and why. Another great place to start asking questions is with the two-word phrase, what if? I wonder how many what if questions your students can generate about a topic that you will be studying. Einstein reminds us to never stop questioning. Another way to think about asking questions is to start with the phrase, in what ways might we? You can see some different directions that you could use this phrase in your classroom with your subject matter. But these are great questions to ask when you're approaching a topic or a problem. Asking questions like these prepares students to learn. It ignites their curiosity and engages them in critical thinking as they begin to learn. Is there a new unit or a challenging concept coming up in your lesson plans? I want to give you, again, a minute to think about where you might use questioning in your classroom. And is there one of the three formats that I brought up that you would like to start with? So again, take a minute and take some quick notes for yourself about how and where you might use this strategy in your classroom. Go ahead. Okay. Well, I imagine that we've all heard of problem solving, but have you heard of problem finding? This is not something I remember talking about as a teacher, but the science world certainly understands that the person who identifies and describes a problem does more to advance knowledge than the person who comes up with the solution. Listen to this quote from someone who was perhaps one of the best problem finders in scientific history. Again, our friend Albert Einstein. He says, most people are quite clear by now that there are real differences between scientists who are largely solving problems and those who are mainly raising questions. Problem finding is more important than problem solving. So, how can we use this in our classrooms? Try this idea. Ask your students to search for problems every day for a week. The problems they can identify can come from something that they notice at home, at school, in their neighborhoods and communities. Identifying the problems will require them to sharpen their skills of observation as they walk through life. They will have to pay close attention to what is going on around them. They will need to become problem noticers. For example, is there an unsafe crosswalk on the way to school? Is there a tree growing in front of a stop sign? Is dinner time a chaotic period at their home when parents and children all arrive home tired and hungry? Does the can opener in their kitchen always break down, but the one their grandma has doesn't? Have students take notes for a few minutes every day about the problems they've noticed. Maybe they keep a problem finding journal, or if you already have them keep notebooks, they could have a section for problems they have found. By teaching them to write problems down as they notice them, you are demonstrating to them that creativity in life and learning is a very important quality. At the end of the week, students could write all of their ideas on a big piece of paper so that all the students in the class could walk around and read the problems that their peers noticed. Then students could discuss in small groups which problem they would like to solve and why. Please note, however, it is not necessary to ask the students to spend class time to solve these problems. You have taught them the skill that you wanted to highlight, problem finding. Besides, you probably won't be able to stop the students from thinking about and creating solutions to these problems, even if you wanted to. Once students learn the process of problem finding through this activity, then you could set them loose, identifying relevant problems within your content area. Finally, let's look at what makes up the creative process itself. Most of us are only aware of the aha moment, that part of the discovery. This is the moment that Archimedes shouted, "Eureka!" because he gained seemingly sudden insight into which objects float in water and which do not. The more people paid attention to the process, they observed that ideas don't just appear out of thin air. Edison said, "I didn't fail. I just found 2,000 ways not to make a light bulb. I only needed one way to make it work." As with Edison, there is usually a great deal of sustained hard work before the aha moment. Let's look at what else the creative process involves. One researcher in the early 1900s described 4 phases of the creative process. First, he talked about preparation, which includes thinking about the problem, gathering information, and collecting possible ideas. Then, incubation. This is the period in which one goes on about their life, their normal life, walking places, showering, sleeping, eating meals, and not consciously thinking about the problem. But of course, the problem is still very much a part of their subconscious thoughts. Then there's the illumination, or what we have already described as the aha experience, when the solution seems to suddenly come into view. And then verification, when the solution is checked and evaluated for how well it works. More recently, researchers have described the creative process using simpler but similar phrases: hard work, idle time alone, insight, that's our aha moment again, and elaboration, where changes can be made to bring the idea to completion. So, do you think there could be value in teaching your students these parts of the creative process? If you do, maybe the next time they are stuck writing a paper or solving a math problem, they will realize that they need to stop consciously working on the problem, or maybe they don't have enough background information about particular aspects of the problem. Maybe they need some time alone. For me, teaching students the phases of the creative process highlights that by its nature, problem solving is a process. It is a journey both to be enjoyed but also sometimes to struggle through because they have to do work when the solution is not obvious. Most often, the solution can only be found after much hard work. If you'd like, use the next minute to take some notes on how you might use teaching the creative process to your students, how you would like to do that, and what your ideas are for your classroom. Take a minute to do that. Okay, I hope you've got some notes that you can just, if you'd like, as we reflect on the things that we've already talked about today, teaching them, asking all kinds of really good questions, identifying problems, and understanding the creative process. I want to assure you that I just didn't randomly pick ideas to share with you. Everything that I chose today was selected because of its focus on increasing creativity and deep thinking in our classrooms. I hope that maybe one or two of these ideas has captured your imagination and given you some new ways to nurture creative thinking in your classroom. I hope that tonight we can agree to release the responsibility to cover enormous amounts of content and solve all the problems of the world. Instead, let's enter our classrooms hoping to encourage our students as they explore parts of their world that we know are worthy of their curiosity. Enjoy the learning feast that you create with your students. And before we get into a period of question and answer, I do want to let you know that I have gathered some resources that will be sent to you that I hope will understand some of the process that I went through as I prepared this, but also will help you take this as far as you want to take it. This may just be something that whets your appetite for working at nurturing creative and deep thought. So I will turn off my screen share.
Okay, Jane, thank you very much. Thank you for being with us and talking about ways to bring energy and joy to our classrooms by making some small changes. I had heard before about problem solving, about problem finding. That was interesting to me. And of course that, that was super. Well, now is the time for Q&A, pra është koha për pyetje përgjigje, edhe për këtë kohë do të na ndihmoj Pullumbi, që në fakt është staff mayor e International School Project dhe pjesë e grupit organizator të këtij webinare. Kështu që Pullum, faleminderit. Besoj ke përzgjedhur pyetjet. Sa pyetje kemi gjithsej që do t'ja bëjmë Jane?
Deri tani kemi 4 pyetje. So we will start with the first question. Jane, Brunilda says, hello, my concern today is how can I ignite the spark of love for mathematics in high school? As I'm trying extremely hard, and it kills me the fact that the days generation have no stimulus and no sense of responsibility for their future? Thank you.
I feel your pain. For all my years of teaching, most of the time I taught high school math. I think it can feel often that we are in a battle and that we're fighting. And I think part of what I'm talking about today is finding a way to put out some little cookie crumbs that make them want to come, make them hungry. And sometimes it feels overwhelmingly hard to come up with ideas, to engage them in learning, to turn learning into a game, to give them responsibility for their own learning and making choices. But I think, the more we can involve students in giving us feedback, giving us ideas, when they realize that we do care about their learning, I think when they take ownership of their learning is when they want to do it for themselves instead of wanting to please us or wanting to please their parents. And there is some of that, but as they get older, that is not enough of a motivation. They need to find that desire to learn sometimes really challenging content because it will help them in the long run. But I do feel your pain. It is definitely hard to get students to love math.
Okay. You put it here.
The second question comes from Loretta, and she says, how can I help a student who has a short-term memory?
That would be very challenging. And I'm certain that I'm not the expert on that topic, but I think probably a big part of the answer to that question is how do we as teachers readjust our expectations? Because when we ask students to do things that they don't have the capability to do, that's where their frustration builds. So I would do some research online and look for some ideas. I'm sure there are many out there helping students that have difficulty with short-term memory and long-term memory, and what are ways that you can increase that. I know just with regular learners, a lot of times I use things like songs and them standing up and moving around as they were learning. Sometimes that helps. But probably adjusting our own expectations is challenging as well. Thank you.
The next question comes from Suela, and she says, if you can give us any advice for hyperactive students and students that move a lot in the classroom.
Suela, that's a good question. When I was first preparing this material, one of the things that I wanted to talk about that I didn't have time for was ways that we as teachers can integrate motion into our learning process, because a lot of times students, I know when I go to like a multi-day teacher seminar and I'm expected to sit in a chair for 7 hours, I find myself feeling pretty hyperactive. So what are the ways, can we have students move from learning station to learning station? Can they stand up and recite rules that they need to learn or memorize? Can they be set to music or set to a rhythm? I've seen teachers that are super creative about fractions. They get their students down on, you know, both feet and both hands, and they can move on the floor, but they have to have their hands and feet on the floor. And then if they lift up, if she says 3/4 as a fraction, they have to lift one hand or one foot, and they can get into all kinds of crazy positions. But it's just anything that we can do to increase the amount of movement in our classrooms will help not only the hyperactive students, but the ones who just get weary of sitting. So that's my short answer.
Thank you, Jane. We have time for 2 more questions. We will go with a Trip, who says, how can we teach music and instruments when students know that the outcome is challenging and hard?
I think that describes all of learning, whether it's you know, the sports skills or the rules of grammar or mathematics. All of learning is hard. And I think sometimes as adults, we forget that every single thing, you know, tying your shoe, learning to walk, saying please and thank you, and whatever the rules of social engagement are for you. Learning is hard, and I would just reinforce that no matter what your discipline is, that go back to that growth mindset, that it does take hard work, and often we try and fail a number of times before we're successful, or maybe we only even experience partial success. But you know, if you can talk to the students about musicians, professional musicians, they log tens of thousands of hours of practice before they play at that high level of ability. Just like when we watch a sport on TV, they're just showing us the highlights. They're showing us the most amazing plays, but it took lots of work to get there before anyone could ever, you know, make that header into the goal. So growth mindset is my answer to that question.
We will end with a question from Emanuela. She is a literature teacher, and she says, how can I increase students' desire to read extracurricular books? Because I am a language teacher and my students say, what do we need language for?
Only to think and speak and communicate in any way that we do, but that's a great question. Again, I think student choice may be a great way to encourage students to read outside of the curriculum. Many high school students will say that they have not read a book from beginning to end since they started high school. They do anything they can to avoid the work of reading entire books. And I think that student choice, giving them the choice to decide what books, what genre, what kind of style or kind of author they want to read, could be very helpful. And other than that, I think maybe having the students in small groups, that if they enjoy the same kind of book, where they could talk about the genre of the book and who are the best authors. And I have a 16-year-old granddaughter who's a voracious reader, and you know, she just wants somebody to give the description that's enticing, that makes her want to read that next book. But I realize we're we're not all voracious readers. So I think you make it as exciting as possible by giving them choices in what they can read. And it may not be, you can read anything in the universe. Maybe instead of, this is our class novel and everyone's going to read this, maybe you have 2 or 3. And that might help them engage a bit more. You guys are asking really hard questions.
Okej, kemi mbaruar besoj me pyetjet. Faleminderit shumë Pullum dhe faleminderit të gjithëve ju që keni shkruar. Ishin edhe më shumë pyetje, por për efekt të kohës nuk mundemi dot që t'i japim përgjigje të gjitha pyetjeve, por ju falenderojmë që na keni ndjekur. Edhe akoma nuk kemi mbaruar, por deri në këtë momente janë 404 mësues që janë duke na ndjekur që prej fillimit dhe deri tani. Ju falenderojmë shumë nga zemra. Ndërkohë që vazhdojmë, Jane, thank you very much for everything that you have shared with us. And we can't wait to have you again in Albania one day. Will you come? I hope so.
Falenderojmë Gjeni për gjithçka që ka ndarë me ne dhe presim me padorim kohën kur ajo mund të vinë në Shqipëri.
And have a good day.
Thank you everyone.
Ju falenderoj të gjithëve.
Mirë, shpresoj që ky webinar të ketë nxitur të menduarit tuaj, të jeni inkurajuar dhe të jeni frymëzuar. Siç që thash edhe në fillim të këtij webinari, ISP-u vjen në ndihmë mësuesve edhe në aspektin e zhvillimit personal dhe atë shpirtëror. Për këtë më lejoni të prezantoj 2 materiale që neve kemi. Një mundësi shumë e shkëlqyer është për të gjitha ju mësuese, vajza, gra, të cilat keni dëshirë të jeni pjesë e një grupi të vogël fluturim në lartësi. Është ky materiali këtu në fakt që do ta tregoj. Është ky libri. Shumë prej jush kanë qenë pjesë e një grupi të tillë dhe shpresoj që edhe shumë të tjerë do të kenë dëshirë të jenë pjesë. Ne kemi filluar tashmë grupet e vogla, siç ju tham, edhe nuk jemi vetëm në Tiranë, por jemi edhe në Shkodër, edhe në Elbasan, në Vlorë, në Berat. Nuk e di nëse kam marrë në një qytet tjetër, jemi në 5 qytete deri tani, me dëshirën patjetër edhe për të shkuar në qytete të tjera me grupet e vogla apo me seminare fizike. Fluturimi në lartësi është një bashkëbisedim, një grup të vogël me 6-8 persona, mund të jenë edhe më shumë. Ky është një mjet trajnimi për jetën, e kemi quajtur, sepse me të vërtet ndihmon shumë për të mësuar se kush je në të vërtet, cili është potenciali që ti ke brenda vetes. Ky material do t'ju mësoj ju të zbatoni 6 parime që do t'ju ndihmojnë të gjeneroni ide të reja dhe të krijoni një ambient për jetë ndryshim personal. Disa nga temat që trajtohen në këtë libër janë në këtë material, në këtë trajnim, janë të zbulosh që ti je unike dhe ta njohësh më mirë personalitetin tënd, të përkufizosh themelin e jetës tënde, të zbulosh drejtimin tënd në jetë e të tjera. Ky libër, ky material u jep përgjigje pyetjeve: kush jam, pse jam këtu, ku po shkoj, si të arij atje e të tjera me radhë. Në këtë grup do të njiheni dhe krijoni miqësi me mësuese të tjera që janë në të njëjtin udhëtim si ju. Do ta njihni më shumë veten përmes testeve të personalitetit, përmes bisedave interaktive, lojrave apo dëshmive të ndryshme. Unë vetë jam dëshmitare se sa jetë ndryshues ka qenë ky material për shumë nga mësueset që kanë marrë pjesë për vite me radhë. Në fakt, një nga mësueset tona, për shembull që ka marrë pjesë, quhet Moza, shkruan: ky libër më ndihmoi të vlerësoj origjinalitetin tim. Duke takuar njerëz kaq pozitiv, më nxiti të mos heq dorë nga gjërat pozitive dhe të jem ndihmë për njerëzit aty jashtë. Kemi dhe shumë komente të tjera nga mësuese që kanë marrë pjesë se si ky material i ka ndihmuar ato për të njohur veten dhe për të dhënë më të mirën prej tyre. Nëse dëshironi të bëni pjesë e një grupi të tillë, ne do të dërgojmë një link. Pra pasi të mbaroj menjëherë sa të mbyllet webinari, ne të dërgojmë linkun bashkë me apo tani. Plumbi më thotë që do ta dërgojmë tani, në fakt. Pra tani do t'ju dërgojmë një link në cilin ju mund të klikoni. Edhe nëse dëshironi të bëni pjesë e këtij grupi të vogël, thuaj dëshiroj të marr pjesë. Nëse je tashmë, besoj që është opsioni që jam tashmë pjesë e një grupi të tillë dhe nuk ke nevojë të klikosh aty që dua të marr pjesë sërish. Pra vetëm nëse nuk je pjesë e një grupi të tillë, do klikosh dua të marr pjesë. Në fakt, kjo vlen edhe pse ky material është për mësueset vajza gra, më thënë edhe juve që jeni mësues burra, ju lutem klikoni dhe thoni dua të marr pjesë, sepse nuk kemi bërë një link enkas për materialin tjetër që unë do shpjegoj pak më pas, që është për ta, pra për librin 7 zakonet e njerëzve të suksesshëm. Por kur të shikoni këtë link tani të shfaqet në ekranin tuaj, kliko dhe thua dua të marr pjesë, edhe nëse je mësuese apo je mësues. Mirë. Materiali, pra, siç ju thash, ne kemi grupe që janë me vajza dhe gra mësuese, por kemi edhe grupe të cilat janë me mësues burra. Edhe unë dua t'u jap një mundësi edhe mësuesve burra për të qenë pjesë e një grupi të tillë. Ndoshta nuk vjen shumë natyrshëm burrave të mblidhen në grupe dhe të flasin dhe të diskutojnë, por ju sugjeroj dhe ju inkurajoj fort që edhe këto grupe ndihmojnë mjaft për në zhvillimin tuaj personal dhe për të krijuar miqësi të reja me mësues të tjerë. Grupi Fluturim në lartësi bëhet fjalë për takime fizike aty në Tiranë, domethënë, por edhe në qytetet ku neve sapo lançuam se ku jemi, mund të kemi kontakte dhe të lidheni me ton. Mjafton që të shprehni interesin tuaj dhe do t'ju ndihmojmë dhe t'ju lidhim me personat kontakt. Pra, materiali tjetër që dua t'ju prezantoj është 7 zakonet e njerëzve të suksesshëm. Është një libër i cili bazohet në disa parime, siç janë fillo duke patur fundin në mendje, vendos në fillim gjërat kryesore, paradigma fito, në fillim kërko të kuptosh, pastaj të kuptohesh, sinergjia e të tjera. Këto janë disa nga temat që përmbledh libri 7 zakonet e njerëzve të suksesshëm. Nëse do doje të ishe pjesë e një grupi të tillë, të lutem kliko tek linku dhe thuaj dua të marr pjesë. Mirë, ky është lajmërimi për grupet e vogla. Vërtet ju inkurajoj sepse ka akoma kohë. Pra shkurti dhe ne besojmë fort që një grup të tillë ju mund ta arrini dhe deri në fund të majit ju të keni mbaruar dhe të keni qenë pjesë e një grupi të tillë, të cilin ju siguroj që do ta shijoni pafund. Do ta mbyllja me një thënie, në fakt, nëse do të shfletonim revistën Shkolla e Re, publikuar në muajt janar shkurt të vitit 1921, na sjell në vëmendje kjo revistë një qëllim sublim të shkollës. Ajo është shkruar në dialekt, por unë do ta lexoj në përpjekur ta përshtas në fakt në gjuhën e sotme letrare dhe në mënyrë të përmbledhur. Dhe dua ta mbyll pikërisht webinarin ton me këtë thënie që më pëlqeu shumë, që ka qenë një qëllim i para shumë viteve, domethënë një shekulli gati më përpara, por që besoj që duhet të jetë dhe qëllimi i shkollës sot dhe besoj që është, edhe unë besoj sepse në qëllimet tuaja ju mësuese ja keni këtë edhe sot tek kësaj dite. Pra qëllimi i shkollës cili është të rrisë fëmijë në urtësi dhe besim, të përtëri fuqitë e mendimit, të përtëri ato njohuri të cilat pasi përftohen e zhvillohen në kokë, mund të dalin prej tyre burra apo student mësues, burra dhe gra do të thoshan që të jenë në krye të vendit dhe familjes, qytetar të arsyeshëm për atë dhe shembuj të mirë në fushën e njerëzimit. Faleminderit shumë që jeni çdo ditë aty me fëmijët, me nxënësit në shkollë për ta bërë këtë qëllim realitet në jetën e tyre. Për t'ju informuar, të gjithë ju që jeni duke na ndjekur, për t'ju informuar për aktivitetet, për burimet dhe të tjera, ju lutem që t'i bëni like faqes tonë në Facebook, që është IR International School Project. Kemi edhe faqen tonë në Instagram e të njëjtin emër, ISP Albania në fakt. Tani besoj që kemi ardhur në fund të webinarit, edhe sa po të mbyllet ky webinar, mos u largoni në fakt, sepse në ekranin tuaj do të shfaqet fleta e vlerësimit ku ju do të jepni informacionin tuaj të saktë, pasi kjo do të duhet për certifikatën digjitale që ne ua kemi premtuar dhe ua dërgojmë gjithmonë në emailin tuaj, pra në postën tuaj elektronike. Ju lutem të shkruani saktë emrin, mbiemrin, çfarë ju kërkohet aty, emri i shkollës ose gjitha të dhënat, emaili juaj duhet jetë i saktë. Ndonjëherë shkruani shumë shpejt dhe nuk arrim dot të kuptojmë shkrimin dhe mund të ndodhë që të kthehet emaili ose të mos ju vijë certifikata juaj, kështu që ju lutem ndërsa plotësoni të jeni të saktë në plotësimin e formularit që ju kërkohet. Kështu që unë ju falenderoj edhe një herë për gjithë vëmendjen, për pjesëmarrjen tuaj. Do takohemi patjetër edhe në seminare fizike, sipas lajmërimeve që do t'i shfaqim në emaile apo në faqet tona të medias elektronike. Do takohemi edhe në webinare të tjera dhe deri atëherë qofshi mirë, me shëndet ju dhe familjet tuaja dhe miru takofshim. Ju falenderojmë nga zemra të gjithëve. Faleminderit.